Keith here from North Party Fly Shop. The old adage, big fish eat little fish, and that's pretty much what this fly pattern, this minnow pattern, is all about. A few years back, Luke and I were coming back into Mission Bay on Omak Lake, and we started noticing a lot of the larger Lahontan cutthroats were in that water, in the shallows. Weren't exactly sure why till we got into shore and noticed the large schools of different minnows and fries that were hanging out in there, and those fish were in there feeding on them. So, of course, being a fly tyer, I immediately started putting things together and came up with this pattern. Originally, I didn't have a name for it. It wasn't until a couple of years ago. Tyler in the fishing department, I'd given him a couple to use, and he came back and told me that he calls them the MinnRoe. So it stuck. I've used this fly, of course, like I said, originally for Omak Lake. I've used it in other lakes, and I've also used it in the rivers and reservoirs. Very effective. Didn't seem to matter what time of year, because the same pattern I used in the springtime and the fall time didn't matter. It's kind of a transparent or translucent, whatever, however you want to call it, type fly. So it represents just about any minnow that you're going to encounter. Pretty base color. I do sometimes tie it with a little bit of chartreuse in it, and it seems to have a really good effect, especially when I'm fishing for bass or panfish. And actually I found out that it worked with a little bit of chartreuse, worked real good in Omak Lake. Those fish seem to like that chartreuse color. I don't know exactly why. So I tie this up generally in a size 8 hook that pretty much covers the 1.5 inch to almost 2-inch minnows that seems to be a lot of them in the shallows there. So we'll get started with this in just a second. So this is what we are going to be tying up. The other thing too is, besides some of the local waters around here, some of the customers that come in and have gotten this fly have tried it at Ross Lake up out of the Skagit Valley. Had very good success catching the trout up in there. Also, some of the guys who fish the Puget Sound for sea run cutthroats have done real good with this also. So it's pretty versatile in what you can use it for. So we're going to get started here. So we're going to use size 8 Gamakatsu SL45. This is a bonefish fly hook. That one right there. And we'll get that in our vise. And the thread we're using is a 140 Ultra thread in white to start with. We will be switching that to another thread color for a short spot. And we'll get that started. I usually do about an eye length back to start my thread. Take it off. And we're going to take that thread all the way back to the bend of the hook, right about there. The next thing we're going to do is, originally when I tied this fly, I just did the top wings, if you want to call it, and nothing else. I found that by adding white bucktail, a few fibers in the tail, it kind of kept the body material from wrapping around the hook. So we're going to take a little bit of that there. You don't need a lot, because this is just a little stiffer material, just to kind of help out. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take all the long fibers out, like that, and then we're going to grab about where we think we want that even amount, and then we're going to pull out all the short fibers. And don't need quite that many there. I'm going to reduce that a little bit. It's a little bit of wastage, but get that done like that. Get some of the funky ones out of there. There we go. And that's about all you're going to need right there. So you're going to do about a hook length back, or actually maybe a hook length and a half, two, roughly about like that. I'm going to grab the tips, get them held into place over the top of the hook, a couple of loose wraps, and then we kind of cinch up a little bit, a couple more, and then we're just going to advance it forward. and that's how much tail you want back there. As you can see, I've got a few longer ones I really don't want, and they're kind of going the wrong way. You can wait till you get it all tied in, but I like to get it done so I don't forget. Okay, so we're going to wrap this forward and keep it on top. And just before we get up to where we started our thread, we're going to cut that off. Cinch that down real good. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to take a couple of strands of, where are we at here? Crinkle mirror flash, this stuff right here. Anybody who's seen me tie know that I like this stuff a lot. I don't know why, just material I like to use. So we're going to tie that in at the front because we're going to go back over the hook shank, over our thread, and then we're going to come back forward again. So let's get that started. About there. Get that wrapped up a little bit. And we're just going to take close to touching wraps as we can because we're going to come back over. So if we miss any spots, we'll pick it up on our return. Once we get back to the right here at our tail, I usually will go underneath and take a few wraps going down the shank at the bend just to add a little bit more flash in there. Advance that back up, just like that. And then we're just going to wrap over where we started. Tie that off right there. Trim off the excess. Don't throw this away because you're going to need it shortly on another spot on the fly. All right. Okay. All right, with that done, next step is we are going to add some Loon UV Clear Fly Finish in the flow. Real thin stuff. You do not need a lot. We're just going to coat that crinkle flash body material just to kind of give it some strength so that it doesn't get tore up by the fish's teeth. Also, what I do, I come in here now and I'll put just a little bit at the base of the bucktail material, and that is to strengthen up and get that thing to ride straight back. And we get a little bit too much underneath there. There we go. All right. So we're going to hold that bucktail straight back, just like that. And we're going to hit it with our light. There we go. Alright. So the first part of, I guess you want to call the wing, is sinuous laser dub, and I'm using the white. Don't need a lot because we want this fly to be small and transparent. So we're going to put in just enough, and need just a little bit more. There we go. We want it to go back just about the full length of that bucktail. Lock that down, wrap it in, trim off the excess. There we go. And now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to whip finish that off because we're going to add a different thread for a little bit. There we go. So what we're going to add is ultra thread 140, or excuse me, this is 70. 140 or the 70, doesn't matter. This is the fluorescent fire orange. I'm tying it in at the gill area. It's also kind of like a hot spot. It helps draw the fish's attention. So we'll start that right there. I usually flip my tag forward now, just so that when I clip it off, it'll get buried a little bit better. I'm going to advance that back, and the little trick there I've learned is to take your eyes, and if you put them up where you're going to put them, you want that gill slit or hot spot to be right behind the eyes, just a little bit. So we'll advance this a little bit further back, get that in there real there, and we're going to whip finish that off because that's all we need for that color. So now we're going to reattach our thread, or white thread I should say. You notice a lot of times I put my hand back here, and that's just to kind of keep everything looking the way I want it. I'm not trying to hide anything. Just makes it easier for me to tie. Alright, the next part of the wing, which is actually the back, will be, again, some sinew laser dub, and we're going to use the olive. You don't need a lot here, probably just a little less than what you would on the white. This is just to give kind of a little bit of back color. You notice that I'm always twisting this together to kind of make sure it's flowing the right way. Alright, now then we're going to take that piece of, where did I put it? There it is. Crinkle flash, that one of them, and we're going to use that for kind of our lateral line. So I'm going to start on my side first, and what you're going to do is you're going to kind of put that just below where the olive and the white meat, so kind of somewhat center of the body there. We'll tie it in on one side, and we're going to rotate our vise up, and we're going to run that opposite on the other side and try to match them up as much as possible. If you can't, that's okay, because when we work on the next step coming up, we can kind of get that all to center up a little bit better. Cut that off. Alright, so that's kind of how you want it, right like that. So we're at the point now, we're just going to clean this up a little bit, get our head cleaned up, get the body wraps right. I should say body wraps, the head wraps. And then we're just going to whip finish this off. Don't worry about doing too many whip finishes here. This is all going to be coated and hidden. Alright, one other step before we start working on the eyes. A little trick that I saw is anytime you're going to use stick-on eyes like we're going to be using here, and I guess in case I didn't mention it, for this size hook, generally I'll use a 5mm or a 3mm hook. Eye coloration, depending on the fish that you're tying. If you're doing an example would be walleye fry or red-sided shiner or some of those, they got a yellow eye. If you're doing a walleye fry, then I would switch from the olive back to a brown back, and probably some kind of a tannish yellow for the rest of the body coloration. And then for the crinkle flash or flashaboo, if you want to use that instead, I'd probably go with some kind of a gold or a yellowish gold on the shank there. Anyways, so we're using living eyes, like I said, 3 or 4 millimeter. And before we put those on, what I do is I take a pair of hemostats, and they've got the flat jaw with no ridges on the very tip. I'll come in and squeeze on both sides of my thread, and what that does is it kind of gives me a flat spot to lay those eyes on. It just helps a little bit when you're kind of lining everything up. So yes, if you kind of flatten that out a little bit with a pair of good flat jawed hemostats, or if you got a pair of pliers, they'll work fine. Just make sure they are flat, no ridges, or no jaws on them, I should say. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to lay that just that way, so that the one side is laying up. I'm going to take just a little bit of super glue, put it on there. Don't necessarily need it with the these stick-on eyes, but it doesn't hurt. And we're going to position your eye so that it's kind of center on the shank, equal distance up, equal distance down. Oop. And kind of want to get that right about there, just like that. Make sure it kind of lays the right way. There we go. And to the other side. You don't need a lot of glue on there. It just makes it a little easier when you're working with it to hold it in place once that is glued up. And you want to use the super glue that kind of sets up fairly fast. You want to line your eyes up, make sure that they're laying there just like that, and let that dry out for a minute. So the next step is going to be, we're going to take some Loon Thin clear finish, and so our first point is going to be on top, right between the eyes. That will also help kind of set those eyes in the right spot. And this is kind of a, I don't know if you want to call it a slow process, but it's a step process. You start with top, then you go to the bottom, the other thing I do is then on the sides, and I do one side then the other, and that way you can lock in that lateral line. You can also lock in your wing, if you want to call it that, so that it goes back the right way. So what I do is I come right there, and the target point would be, I guess for your glue, would be right where the hot spot is, right in this area here. So you just add just a little bit, hold everything in place, hit it with a light. Flip to the other side. You're going to do the same thing. And then from here, you just start working the whole head, filling it in so that you encase the eyes in this UV resin. And if you're in the thin, the nice thing about the thin is it will flow around so that you don't have to really move too much, and you can kind of build your head. And using a rotary vise will be a big help, because you move it and you can kind of adjust accordingly and spread things around the way you want it so it all looks kind of even. And once you kind of get an idea that everything looks the way you want it, just hit it with the light. So we're pretty much, that's that. Check it. If you just run your finger, make sure there's no ridges, everything feels good. Now you'll notice that there's a point there, and if I had a razor blade with me, which I don't, that's all right. We'll just kind of, you want to clear that eye now. There we go. Clean that out a little bit. Clean this out. There you go. Everything looks kind of good. Need just a little bit more on the bottom. To make it look, and if you hold it like that, then it kind of moves in a little bit better. Just kind of play around with it. You want to look at, want it to get it to look like a, you know, a head, fish head. Rock it around, hit it with a light. So for the most part, that's done. Just remember, on your little minnows and your fry and that kind of stuff, the eye always seems to be bigger than what it should be. And a lot of that has to do with being able to spot predators, so they have a little, their eyes will develop a little larger when they're young. Okay, so we're done with that. The only other thing I do, now you can use the UV flow if you want. I use this hardest hull. I use the penetrator. It's a really thin lacquer. It just, I don't know, gives me just a little bit more strength to it. Hit that a little bit, just make sure it's all good. It only takes about, once you use this stuff, it doesn't take long for it to dry out. So anyways, so we're pretty much done there. Like I said, less is more a lot of times with this fly. Remember, you're imitating small fish. If you're going to fish it, I fish it in close to shore. Small fish, small fries, small minnows, they don't like going in deep water. Deep water means bigger fish, so they try to stay in the shallows where they've got cover, they've got escapement, they've got numbers. One thing I've learned, sometimes I will fish this with a second fly, second pattern in front of it to kind of give it a look of a couple of fish together, because generally your little fry, your little minnows, they don't like being alone. There's safety in numbers. So if you run a tandem setup, one in front of the other, dropper type system, or however you want to call it, you'll have a little bit better success. So there you go. That's the MinnRoe.